2013 by the Wallace Foundation, and it very effectively summarizes a body of research about the influence of the principal on instructional outcomes. Here are a few highlights. Educational research shows that most school variables considered separately have at most small effects on learning. The real payoff comes when individual variables combine to reach critical mass. Creating the conditions under which critical mass is reached is the job of the principal. 10 years ago, school leadership was noticeably absent from most major school reform agendas. Even the people who saw leadership as important to turning around failing schools expressed uncertainty about how to proceed. However, during the last decade, everything has changed in the way that we look at school improvement. The finding on this slide was reinforced in a major study by researchers at the universities of Minnesota and Toronto. It points out the empirical link between school leadership and the improved student achievement we're all seeking. In fact, if you dig into this piece of the research a bit, you'll learn that the research shows that most school variables have, at most, small effects on learning. The real payoff doesn't come until the individual variables reach critical mass. This comes as no surprise that the slide says the principal remains the central source of leadership influence, and it comes as no surprise to those of us who have been principals. The principal remains the central source, and we know that all things pass by the principal's desk in most schools in this country. In fact, NASSP works on tools and resources on a regular basis to help principals deal with that issue and to prioritize and organize their thinking. The research says that creating conditions under which the real payoff can occur is the primary job of the principal, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. One explanation that Karen Seashore-Lewis and Ken Leithwood found is that leaders have the potential to unleash latent capacities in organizations. And the report highlights these 5 key practices of effective principals. I'm going to say just a word or two about each of the 5. In a detailed 2010 survey, school and district administrators and policymakers and others declared principal leadership among the most pressing matters on a list of issues in public education. It ranked in front of things like dropout rates, STEM, student testing, and preparation for college and careers. And those of you in the audience who are principals are probably saying really, because we all know that those other items get a whole lot more press than this one. So let's look at the first of the 5 key practices of effective principals. Effective principals are responsible for establishing a school-wide vision of commitment to high standards and success of all students. And career success in a global economy today depends on a strong education for all segments of the society. And we need to be sure that everyone can compete fairly. There's still this yawning gap in academic achievement between disadvantaged and advantaged students, and some places are finding some success in seeing that narrow. Effective principals also make sure that the notion of academic success for each student gets picked up by the faculty and underpins what the researchers at the University of Washington describe as a school-wide learning improvement agenda that focuses on goals and student progress. The next key element says that creating a climate hospitable to education is one of the essential pieces for principals. And we know that effective principals ensure that their schools allow both adults and children to put learning at the center of the activities. Something as simple as organizing the bell schedule so that bells aren't ringing while teaching is going on can have a major impact on the kind of learning that goes on in the classroom. Most effective principals focus on bringing a sense of school community to all of these things. Characteristics such as respect for every member of the community, upbeat, welcoming, solution-oriented, no-blame professional environment is what we're striving for. And efforts to involve staff and students in a variety of activities, many of them being school-wide activities, very important. For outstanding examples of schools that do this very well, you can go to our website, nassp.org/breakthrough, and read about the 70 or so breakthrough schools across this country. High poverty, high achieving schools, every one of them, and they have a culture and a climate in their school conducive to the things that the report says we must focus on. Look at the next element. We see that principals who get high marks from teachers for creating a strong climate of instruction in their schools also receive higher marks than other principals for spurring leadership in the faculty. So this collaborative leadership piece, the NASSP talks about collaborative leadership in our Breaking Ranks framework. We talk about doing things with teachers that help teachers be better teachers and make principals be better principals. The research found a link between professional community and higher student successes and scores on tests. Think about your learning communities, your PLCs, whatever you label them in your school, your teams, and the work that you do as teams get you a lot farther than any work that you might do alone or that a principal might do alone. When there is a link, however, that I don't want to lose, and that is that a central part of being a great leader is cultivating leadership in others. And I think it's important that not only do you develop yourself as a leader, but you look around and work to develop others as you build that leadership team. The next element about improving instruction focuses on effective principals working relentlessly to improve achievement, and they do that through looking at the quality of instruction. They help define and promote high expectations. They attack teacher isolation and fragmented effort, and they connect directly with teachers in the classroom. Principals intent on promoting growth are in the classroom all the time. They're giving teachers feedback, and they're making sure that if they can't be in the classroom to do that, someone else on their staff can do that, or someone else in the district can do that. The big dilemma that comes up here is the secondary school principal, primarily high school, but to a certain extent middle school as well. We can't be experts in every discipline that's taught in our buildings. I couldn't, as a former English teacher and principal, go into a physics classroom and give really good feedback on the physics lesson. I could talk about the teaching techniques. I couldn't talk about the content. So there's a missing piece, and the research points out that we do have experts in our buildings that most schools don't take advantage of. They're called department chairmen in some places they're called subject resource teachers. They're folks who can go into classrooms, who know the discipline. The head of the science department can give feedback in most of the areas taught in that department. The math department, same thing, and an English department again. So those folks can provide that kind of meaningful content feedback that teachers need, and in fact teachers yearn for. We can also facilitate opportunities for teachers to observe each other and to interact with one another around content. That can be a major growth factor for the development of instruction in the school and in the classroom. And then last but not least, the principal who is learning focused is intent on helping teachers improve their practice, either directly or with the aid of other school leaders like the ones I just spoke about. And last but not least, in looking at the main effective practices, key practices, is one that starts with a word that I don't like very much, managing, because principals are much more than managers. But look at what they're managing and look at what they're juggling. They must hire carefully. Probably the most important thing a principal does is hiring. They must also engage aggressively in weeding out people who don't show the capacity to grow. And they have to do all that while adhering to district norms and practices and adhering to union contracts. In some places it's a tremendously complicated juggling act, but it's one that must be on the front burner for all principals. They also view data not just as a way to pinpoint problems, but as a way to understand the nature and the causes of the problems. And these school leaders press for higher academic standards by mapping out rigorous targets for improvement in learning, getting faculty on board, challenging low expectations and low funding for things like special education, and making sure that test results are going in the right direction, but that the test doesn't drive all of the instruction. School improvement doesn't happen overnight, and that's the last point that I'll make about these key practices. It takes 5 to 7 years for good change to occur and for beneficial impact to happen in the school. However, there's really high turnover among principals, especially at the high school level. We know that lower student performance in reading and math specifically are the result of that high turnover rate. So the lesson learned is that effective principals need to stay put, and good superintendents need to help effective principals stay put and have the long haul be the goal for school improvement. I'd like to turn the mic back over to Pete and sit back and enjoy the interview with Linda.
Thank you, John. It's my honor and pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond. She is no stranger to educators around the globe. Her work has contributed greatly to the advancement of teaching, learning, and leadership. In April 2012, Lucas Held, the Wallace Foundation's communications director, interviewed Linda Darling-Hammond. An excerpt of that interview is in the report we're exploring today. We asked Dr. Darling-Hammond to respond to some of the same questions from her interview and give her an opportunity to reinforce and expand on her original responses. Good afternoon, Linda.
Unmuted.
Good afternoon, Linda.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here.
Well, let's jump right into the questions. I'll ask the first question. There may be a little delay between the time I ask the question and you come back on. But the first question, what do we know about the link between effective teaching and good principles?
Unmuted. Well, we know that basically principals, in the way that they organize the school environment and the way that they support or don't support teachers, have everything to do with teachers' effectiveness. In fact, the most effective schools are those where teachers are working collaboratively together in teams over a long period of time. So effective teaching, it turns out, is not something inherent to only an individual teacher. It's a team sport. And principals are the ones that organize the capacity of the school to enable teachers to work with others. We also know that in every survey that is done about teacher retention and their choices about continuing in the profession, that the principal is a key actor. People are attracted to schools quite often because of strong supportive principals. They will stay even in challenging circumstances if the principal is able to enable them to be as effective as they can be, and they'll leave if the principal is not supportive. So the principal is really key to effective teaching.
Is that connection generally known?
Unmuted. I'm not sure. You know, there's been a lot of attention to the issue of improving teacher effectiveness, and I often will tell people when they come to me, whether it's policymakers or other, leaders who say, how should we improve teacher effectiveness? Often the first thing I'll tell them is, support principal effectiveness because that's really the way in which you can support teacher effectiveness, and that's often a surprise to people. They don't always think about the critical role of the principal as really the orchestra conductor. And like orchestra conductors, that job may seem simpler than it is. If you sit in the audience at a symphony and you see the orchestra leader, keeping time and waving his arms up and down, you say, well, that's simple. I could do that. And you might pay a lot of attention to the virtuoso performances of individual musicians and the group as a whole without fully appreciating that that can't happen without someone who understands how to bring out the best in different players in the collective team, who knows how to create coherence in the curriculum and the practices in the school so that children know what to expect from year to year and can learn more efficiently and effectively, who knows how to support someone who may be struggling for a period of time, both finding resources for them and providing direct assistance, and who knows how to lead, particularly in this era, which is an era of change. And change management is a great part of the job of the principal. That connection between the capacity of the principal and the effectiveness of the teacher should be widely understood, but may currently be underappreciated.
I'd like you to talk, please, about some of the features that distinguish high-performing schools from low-performing schools in terms of what the teachers and the principals do?
Unmuted.
One of the things that I mentioned already is the critical importance of collaboration. People working together as a strong team, helping each other get better at what they do, and planning a coherent set of practices and curriculum together. I think I also mentioned that there are some studies that demonstrate that the most effective gains in student performance come from the work of collaborative teams in schools, not the work of individual teachers. In these days of so much focus on individual teacher evaluation, sometimes in models that rank and sort teachers against each other, rather than building the capacity of the team, we might lose some of the gains we would otherwise make around collaborative practice. You mentioned already the importance of teacher continuity, how much teacher attrition actually undermines the effectiveness of schools. High-performing schools also are built on a strong foundation of trust. Tony Breik did some very important work that illustrated the importance of trust in schools and demonstrated the capacity of schools to grow with trust. I'm going to stop and ask if you can hear me because my computer screen has shifted and I want to be sure that we're still on.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. I have a brand new computer and I'm still learning to train it to do what I want it to do. And it made you disappear and I worried that you had gone away. The trust between and among professionals, which allows people to take risks, to make changes, to try new things, is critical, again, in this era of intensive change in our schools. That doesn't mean trust in a way that is sort of non-evaluative or accepting of anything goes. It's a kind of trust that's built on a foundation of shared commitment to continuous improvement and high standards in practice. Professional learning communities can be a critical part of building a trusting, coherent environment. And finally, the capacity of a school to organize deep learning for students. There is, of course, a lot of discussion of 21st century skills, of implementing Common Core standards that are higher and deeper as well as fewer, that ask students to be able to model and critique and explain and defend their views and produce writing and communication and products and so on. That means that high-performing schools on those standards will increasingly be those that have a rich array of performance assessments in the school where kids are engaged in that kind of project-based, inquiry-based learning, and staff are working together to design that rich environment and to evaluate and score tasks together, to look at student work together, so that they are able to continually deepen the instruction that students encounter.
We began talking a bit about this in response to the last question, but could you elaborate a bit on the specific things that teachers and principals do to create this collaborative focus on learning?
Unmuted.
Well, I think obviously teachers open the door to their classrooms. They don't work behind a closed door in the Ed Crate, classroom. Principals enable teachers to work with colleagues in ways that are important and effective to them. That may mean that there is time set aside for professional learning communities to meet and work on curriculum planning. It may mean that time is freed up for teachers to get into each other's classrooms for reciprocal observations, or for a teacher who's trying to develop a new practice to be able to go visit in the classroom of a teacher who's already developed that practice so that they can work together on it. It may mean that the professional learning communities are defined and redefining, or the groups within which teachers work, for different purposes. So teachers may meet in their third grade team, for example, to plan curriculum together, but then they may also meet on a particular content area with teachers across the learning span, across the grades, to ensure that the work that's done in second grade adds up and supports the work that is done in third or in fourth. There may be times when teachers need to collaborate on problem solving around meeting the needs of individual students and families. And so the ways in which collaboration is supported and encouraged need to be flexible as well as routine and constant. One thing we're going to have to figure out in the United States is how to build into the schedule routinely the kind of time for teacher collaboration and job-embedded learning that is available to teachers in other countries. I was recently with the president of the university in Shanghai, and he pointed out that elementary teachers in Shanghai are with children teaching them 15 hours a week, whereas elementary teachers in the United States are typically with children teaching them 30 hours a week. Well, that differential of 15 hours that Shanghai teachers get to use for their action research, their curriculum planning, their meetings with parents, their outreach to individual students, enable them to be more effective and to have the opportunities for the kinds of collaboration that we often find difficult to access in the industrial model school that many teachers in the United States still teach in.
How prevalent is this collaborative focus? Is it your view that schools are operating with this or the intent to go there, or does this remain the exception in our system today?
There's an interesting study, the Schools and Staffing Surveys, that comes out periodically and surveys principals and teachers in schools. And about 80% of teachers say that they have a chance to collaborate in their school. But if you ask them what percentage have a work in a school that has a deeply collaborative culture, only 15% say that that's the case, and that number is half as much as it was before No Child Left Behind. The NCLB years have really reduced the amount of collaboration in schools as people have focused on a variety of other approaches to education. So I would say that there's a lot of places with a little collaboration, but there are relatively few schools with deep, intensive, collaborative opportunities.
You seem to be saying that the collaborative environment is so important that schools must begin to carve out time to focus on building leaders and teachers' capacity as well as creating structures to support that kind of an environment. You spoke a good bit about structures earlier. How do we create these structures, and how do we build the capacity of our teachers and our leaders to operate effectively within those structures?
Unmuted.
Well, we have to think creatively about both the ways in which we design schools and their schedules and the ways in which we staff schools. In most high-achieving countries, about 70 to 80% of all education employees are classroom teachers. About that amount of the budget goes to support classroom teaching. In the United States, only about 50% of education employees overall are classroom teachers. We have many more layers of governance between states and schools, often regional offices and districts. We have many more special categorical programs which require lots of administrative personnel in central offices to manage the programs, and we have differently allocated division of resources between teachers and educational assistants of various kinds. So we have many fewer people in schools who are actually teachers. In schools that have redesigned to provide more time for teachers, typically they staff their schools with a higher ratio of classroom teachers than may otherwise have been the case. They also organize the time differently. In high schools, quite often you'll see schools moving to longer blocks of time rather than the old 45-minute periods, and then freeing up as a consequence of that redesignation of the time, blocks in which teachers can work together in their disciplinary teams or in their grade level teams. Some schools take an afternoon by banking time. During some days of the week they'll be able to free up an afternoon which is for professional learning and collaboration each week. There are some schools in which students are out doing internships and experiential learning while teachers are working together. In some other countries and in some schools in the United States, there are very active athletics and clubs that are run by people other than the school staff in afternoons that allow the staff to work together. One elementary school that I thought was very creative decided to put all of the specials like art, music, PE, and library on a single day for all the kids in a grade level. So the second graders would have their specials on Tuesday, and the second grade teachers would have all day Tuesday to collaborate and plan and develop, curriculum and even meet with parents and so on. The third graders would have their specials on Wednesday, and the third grade teachers would have Wednesday for that purpose. So I think we have to get out of the routines that we have typically inherited in terms of thinking about the uses of time and the ways in which we allocate personnel to get to a place where collaborative structures are the norm rather than the exception. And this is going to be one of the important jobs of school principals, to help lead that effort to redesign the American school out of the old factory model and into a 21st century paradigm.
As a follow-up to that same question, I'd like to ask you to elaborate on some of the specific skills that teachers and leaders must develop in order to function in a developing collaborative environment.
Unmuted.
Well, obviously you need the skills of collaboration, because collaboration doesn't happen magically by itself. You need the skills of listening to one another. You need the skills of building on each other's ideas. You need the skill of being able to coordinate the work of multiple people. You need really good conflict resolution skills so that as necessary conflicts come up, people will have different ideas. That's kind of the whole point of enabling people to work together. If we all have the same idea, we wouldn't need to work together. Then we need people to have good ways of managing their way through presenting and listening and thinking through and looking at evidence and keeping the needs of the child at the center. That's the other critical commitment which goes along with those skills, that the decisions ultimately will be made based on the best interests of students. You need some norms in the school about what the values and the ways of working will be so that people can revert to a common set of ideas and expectations when they are working their way through different notions about how work can be done. And you need some combination of commonality and flexibility for teachers to have the capacity to still use their own creative ideas in their classrooms, but for common practices to become to be cultivated, to the greatest extent possible within that parameter of allowing individual flexibility.
Thank you for expanding on the idea of the skills that need to be developed for people to take advantage and to have students receive the most benefit from the structures that you talked about. What do teachers need to understand about what effective principals do?
Unmuted.
You know, I think I mentioned earlier that it's easy for outsiders, whether they're parents or community members or even insiders like teachers, to not understand all of the things that principals are up to. Because it's such a varied job. Principals are, you know, community leaders, they are boosters for the school, they are often fundraisers, they are orchestrators of the learning activities, maintainers of the physical as well as the spiritual and educational environment. Each of us in organizations sees the elements of what other people do that happen to cross our paths. And then we wonder, well, what are they doing the rest of the time? I'm working so hard. What is that other person doing? So I think it is important for teachers to understand the range of tasks that principals do to make it possible for teachers to do their own good work. I think it's also important to understand that effective principals have three big buckets of activity that they need to become highly skilled at. One of them, of course, is being an instructional leader, and that doesn't mean being an instructional dictator. It means understanding learning deeply, understanding curriculum and teaching, and being able to kind of sheep herd or nudge, you know, the efforts of lots of people in that direction, and then to support the infusion of expertise and ideas and cross-classroom learning to support that instruction. The second thing the principal has to be is an organizational developer. They have to understand how all the pieces of the organization fit together and how to keep all the pieces of the organization healthy. And that's not just the classroom, it's all the other aspects of the school, the staff, the cafeteria, the whatever else may be, the hall monitors, the buses, etc. So they need to understand the creation and orchestration of a healthy organization as a whole. And then the third area that principals have to be very skilled at is change management. And teachers need to understand that it is actually the job of an effective principal to enable continuous improvement in the school. Not all change is good change. So obviously we want to always be maintaining what works and building on it, not throwing away the baby with the bathwater with each new fad or reform. But it is true that continual improvement requires some aspects of continual change, and that is part of what effective principals need to be able to do in a way that distributes the responsibilities and the leadership with members of the staff.
Linda, one of our participants in the webinar today has asked that you speak more about the capacity of a school to organize deep learning. She'd like some clarity added to that.
Unmuted.
Well, when we think about deeper learning, what I'm talking about when I use that term is the kind of learning that empowers students to learn on their own, developing independent learners who can flexibly access and use information, can analyze and synthesize and produce knowledge and new ideas, can transfer their learning to new situations. And that's, of course, what the 21st century skills are all about. Those are critically important because the world that our kids are going into is a very, very dynamic knowledge environment. I often tell the story about two professors at Berkeley who've been doing some research, and as a Stanford professor, I don't usually like to quote people from Berkeley, our big rival from across the bay, but they've been looking at the growth of knowledge in the world, and they've been finding that, for example, between 1999 and 2003, that 4-year period, there was more new knowledge created in the world than in the entire history of the world preceding. You think about that for a moment, it's kind of breathtaking. And at that time, technology knowledge was doubling every 2 years. It's now doubling every year. And soon it'll be doubling every 6 months. I know that because, you know, I need a new cell phone and a new computer and learn a whole new language every year. And I have to call my kids up and have them teach me the technology. But it's not going to be enough to divide up a static body of knowledge into 12 years of schooling and just say learn these things at each grade level and you'll be done. What our kids are actually going to have to know is how to learn, because they're going to have to solve new problems with knowledge that hasn't even been invented yet, using technologies that are just a twinkle in somebody's eye. So deeper learning will allow them to become independent learners. Now, what does that mean? It means they need to be engaged not in just transmission teaching and learning, where somebody says, learn these things and spit them back to me, which is a form of learning that made sense in the 20th century, at least for the first half, and which is unfortunately reinforced by the kinds of standardized tests that we've been using for a very long time in the United States. You know, pick one answer out of 5. They are going to need to be able to be engaged in inquiry of their own, investigations of their own, developing, analyzing knowledge. They should not be sitting there memorizing anything that can be Googled. They're going to need to be able to be, obviously facts won't disappear. We need to teach facts and skills, but they need to be able to use those facts and skills to solve real problems. So that means we're going to be moving towards a project-based learning approach, which many schools already do, but we're going to have to deepen that learning. The assessments in the schools should be performance-based. Many schools do use large-scale projects, graduation portfolios, in which students have to do scientific investigations and write up the results and defend their findings and hypothesize about the next problem that they would solve based on what they've already learned, social science research, mathematical modeling, etc. And that kind of learning can be made more powerful if it is going on in ways that are school-wide, where students have to present their work to outside audiences, if they need to develop serious products that are scored by teachers, not only their own teacher, but by others as well, so that common understandings of deeper learning standards begin to be evident for students themselves as they work to self-assess and peer assess around those rubrics, to teachers across the school, and to parents who should be coming into the school for those both student-led conferences and exhibitions of projects and investigations that allow them to get a glimpse of the kind of learning that their kids are engaged in and will need to have mastered to be successful in the economy and the society that they're going into. Coming out of the NCLB era, there is in many communities a need to really re-expand the image of learning to represent more fully the kinds of skills that are discussed in the Common Core and that are increasingly going to be needed in the kind of workplaces and higher education institutions kids will be going into.
We are beginning to get some audience questions coming in, but I'd like to go to close to the last question that we have for you, and then we'll get to some of those audience questions, if that's okay. The final question here was not really what advice would you give teachers to become part of the process of making their schools better places? And then the same for school leaders.
Unmuted.
Well, I guess that sometimes the tasks of change seem overwhelming and daunting, and you know, like how do we even get started on these things? But I would say one of the first principles of school improvement is recognize what you're doing well. Take stock of what is really working well, not just for a few kids, but what's working well for all kids. Maybe there are things that are working well for a few kids that could be expanded to a greater number of students so that there's a greater equity and access to the most successful programs and practices in the school. But you can't, we've had such negative school bashing in this country, unnecessary negative bashing, that has caused people to say, well, you know, public schools are failing or nothing is going well. And that's just not true. There's a lot of good work going on in every school in this country, much of it against growing odds in terms of the challenges of deepening poverty and unemployment and homelessness and lack of health care and other things that so many of our children experience. So number one, take stock of what's successful. Think about how to expand the successes. Number two, work together to figure out the ways in which things can be learned across classrooms or fiefdoms or program areas. We have so little time in schools that it's very easy to hunker down and everyone kind of get into their own corner or their own office or their own classroom and just try to keep things together. But ultimately we can do things more effectively and intelligently by sharing what people know. And so one of the universities I was in did a practice that is an example of how just beginning to do a little bit of sharing can dramatically improve practice. We decided to, in this curriculum and teaching division of the university, have each professor share their syllabus with the department members and what they thought of as their most effective assignments or practices or strategies. And that just hadn't been done, and it was a tremendous learning experience, and everybody gained things from each other, learned how to make the curriculum more coherent, talked together about various pedagogical innovations, and even the smallest beginning of a sharing practice across classrooms and elements of the school, and celebrating successes and thinking explicitly about how to build on them can really renew the efforts of continuous improvement in a school.
What are 2 or 3 main takeaways for teachers and principals from this Wallace Foundation report that we've been discussing today?
Unmuted.
Oh, I think there are several. For principals, one big takeaway is a reaffirmation of how very important the role is and how it is evolving as schools are moving from sort of industrial model approaches to collaborative learning communities in which everyone is learning, and in some different ways everyone is leading. And that job of being the leader of leaders, so to speak, and the orchestrator of continual learning is the one that allows schools to move forward and principals to be successful. So I think those are some of the key takeaways, and the capacity of principals, and we've seen so many great examples of this in so many schools across the country, to invent a variety of strategies for people in their organizations to cultivate their own talents and to learn from each other is one of the most inspiring aspects, I think, of both what principals do and what this report highlights. One of the sidebars in the report is from a teacher who said that principals have found talents in me that I didn't know I had. And the way in which principals do that and enable teachers and other staff to become more than they thought they could be in terms of their own capacity is probably the biggest takeaway from the report.
I'd like to combine two questions from some of our participants today. One of them has to do with the use of technology to communicate vision and build teacher effectiveness, and the other one has to do with resources that are available to assist principals with creating this collaborative environment. Some sample resources that are listed in the report are listed here on the screen, and of course these can be downloaded from www.wallacefoundation.org along with other resources. But if you would talk briefly, we have a few minutes left, about how we can access resources and how technology might contribute to our ability to create collaborative environments.
Unmuted.
Well, the number of ways in which technology can contribute is almost infinite. It can't substitute for that face-to-face human interaction, but it can certainly augment in so many ways. It's obviously there are a number of computer-based resources that are interactive sites for teachers to work together with each other. You can do that within a school. You can create the capacity for teachers to collaborate with each other, asynchronously around problem solving and curriculum building. You can use Google Docs, as a way for teachers and staff to comment on plans in action and to add to each other's thinking and so on. There are ways to access great exemplars of new strategies for teaching in this era of Common Core implementation. A lot of schools are taking advantage of both websites that provide a range of Common Core resources and interactive discourse among teachers about how to use those resources, videotapes of pedagogical strategies that are suited to teaching some of the skills in the Common Core. So there are ways that both allow faculties within the school to collaborate more effectively together and to share and build on their ideas together, to get information out to students and parents. Of course, these wonderful platforms in which students can always find their homework because it's online and parents can see what the kids are doing, and teachers and parents can talk to each other, and teachers can talk to each other. Just allows so many ways that a school, even when people are not in the same physical space, can become much more of a interactive, collaborative community to do its work more effectively. And then, of course, to access knowledge and skills and expertise and resources from outside the school in ways that really treasure that very valuable resource of time that is so scarce, and enable people to get to each other more effectively and efficiently. So technology can be a real friend in this process, and skillfully integrated with the very important face-to-face human touch components of leading a school can allow us to access the knowledge and skills that exist really worldwide for this work.
I think we have time for one more question. This is kind of broad and general. It's from Nebraska. How would a principal begin this? How does a principal start to improve education for all students?
Well, I think that one of the things a principal can do to start, of course, everything is always in process, so you know better where you are in process than anyone else, but is to take stock, as I suggested earlier, to listen, to talk to teachers, to talk to other staff, to talk to students, to do the same with parents, and get a sense of what is working and what needs to be addressed to strengthen the school. There's a process that some folks at Claremont Graduate School in California undertook some years ago with a lot of schools in California. It's called Voices from the Inside. And you could get that publication. You could probably Google it. They designed surveys and interviews and focus groups and did a little process with the faculty. The faculty did their own surveys and their own interviews to hear from all the constituencies of the school, the principals, yes, the teachers, the students, the parents, community members, about what their experience of school was. And it was incredibly eye-opening for them about what was what were some of the strengths of the environment and what were some of the challenges. And then they began a process of collectively looking at how to address areas where they really wanted to make strides. The second thing that I would say is when you decide on some strategies that you want to undertake that may be new to your environment, I recommend that you go find schools where it's going on and go see it. I think field trips are very important, because it's hard to get engaged in doing something that you've never seen. And so I love for school people to have the opportunity to learn from each other in a broader learning community beyond the school. A third thing I've seen very effectively done, and we've worked in my center at Stanford with a number of schools that have done this, is to start a study group process over a period of time in which faculty, but often joined by parents and even ultimately, in one case I can think of, students, read together and studied together on some topics that they wanted to make change. In this case it was around small learning communities taking up performance assessments. Over the course of a year they read, they invited people in, they went to look, they talked among themselves, and when they were ready to put a few steps in place for themselves, they had a lot of opportunity to kick the tires, to think, argue, discuss, look, try, evaluate, and it brought them close together, and it allows people to move forward in a very productive way.
Thank you, Linda. Our thanks to John Nori and Linda Darling-Hammond for sharing their time and expertise with us today. Thanks also to the Wallace Foundation for their continuing work to improve education and enrichment for disadvantaged children. However, I must note that all children benefit from the efforts that they put forth to improve education for disadvantaged children. You may download a copy of The Principal as Leader, Guiding Our Schools to Better Teaching and Learning from www.wallacefoundation.org. This is just one of the many valuable resources that you will find there. Go to wallacefoundation.org to find out more about this and other Wallace initiatives in leadership and learning. NESSPRE is proud to work with the Wallace Foundation in helping to communicate its important work to our constituents. We thank Wallace for this opportunity. Finally, thanks to you, our audience, for your participation in the webinar. The video will be available tomorrow at nassp.org webinar videos. If you'd like to learn more about this topic and other important topics, join us in Dallas, Texas, February 6 through 8 for Ignite 14. The highlights of this conference will be Dr. Carol Dweck talking with Daniel Wong. Daniel will be looking at student mindsets, and Carol, of course, the author of Mindset. They're going to talk about why mindsets matter. Thanks again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing some of you in Dallas, Texas. That concludes this webinar. Thank you, and good day.